Brian, I'll actually let you kick us off because I know we kind of built this topic from a conversation that we were having with you about what you're thinking about and what you're interested in right now. And you brought up that you've been really focused on contrast training.
Yep.
And so maybe let's just start there because when I heard that term, I'll be transparent, it was a little bit of a novel term to me. And so maybe just start by talking a little bit about what contrast training is and how you define that.
Sure. I mean, contrast training to me, I've probably been dabbling in it since the late 90s. I think it's, it's something now that there's terms to it. We got fancy equipment and all the things that we can, put in and around it. And it's been, redefined. I've redefined it of how I'm using it. And devices like the 1080 obviously make things, really easy to implement it now. But I mean, basically, we're just adding resistance to different movements to enhance, neuromuscular performance and improve speed. And in 1996, 97, when I started my coaching career, we were running up hills, we were pulling sleds, we were, adding bands to things, to add some sort of a load. I didn't know what a PAP effect was, in 1997. Looking back, I think there's, anecdotally, we had things going in the right direction for a long time. Now we've just been able to define it a little better. And so, for us, that's what contrast training is. It can be implemented in all phases of our training. We put it into our, all of our movement work with acceleration, max velocity, change of direction. We also use it in the weight room, where we can get additional, muscular adaptations through it. And so, the French contrast has been around for, since before I was born. And so just taking some of those concepts and ironing them into our template of how we, train. I guess now the catchphrase is contrast training. So that's kind of how I define it.
Got it.
Now, now, Brian,
Go ahead, Tony.
would you? I remember the first time that we were together one on one over a beer. I asked you. I had to be. I couldn't stay long. I said, "Give me one thing that it is just a must in the weight room." And you talked about the concentric deadlift supersetted with a plyometric, and then a 5 minute recovery. That is an example of contrast training as well, isn't it?
100%. Yeah, that is defining contrast training, right? Like we're putting a load on the body and then we're going to do a similar movement with similar, muscular activation and do it without load. And we get that PAP effect, which is the post-activation potentiation. So we load the system. And then when we unload the system, we get a little bit more of a powerful movement and explosive movement on the back end of it. So, at the end of the day, what we're all chasing is high output. And how do you get higher output is to, activate it through a load and then, implement the same movement without the load.
It was interesting. You said that you started around 96. I think it was in 96 that I went to a clinic at the University of Illinois, and there was a S&C guy that was talking about how they worked with volleyball kids and they would do squats and then they would superset it with box jumps. And they said that they had like three test groups. One was squat only, one was box jumps only, and one was this contrast thing. And that the contrast group improved their vertical jump by 3 inches more than the other two groups. So it wasn't just the squat and it wasn't just the box jump. It was that beautiful combination, that contrast that created the difference. And to me, that really made sense. And so when I went back to our pole barn that served as a weight room at a small school, we simply did jumps after squats. And that was our very primitive way of doing contrast training.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these things, it's funny, right? We stand back, we think we got something, but really it's like because of a time constraint. So you did one exercise and you clustered it with another two or three exercises because you were just trying to save time. I did a lot of large group training when I first started coaching. And, well, let's pair something with this so that we can kind of keep kids moving throughout the weight room or throughout the performance center. And you kind of stumble onto these things that you find, work. And then it's almost like you've reverse engineered it because you're doing those things just to make it work for the athletes. And then you look at the highest level athletes in the world, the Eastern Europeans and the Russians, they were doing this stuff back in the 70s, before, I guess maybe before we were, had even thought about doing it. So yeah, definitely been around a long time.
And would you also say that simply doing a resisted sprint followed by a sprint, that's contrast, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and again, you're also accomplishing, on the force velocity profile, you're accomplishing strength and speed in the same session. Which again, if we all had a perfect world and we had an athlete for 6 days a week and all the recovery that we wanted, that'd be great. But none of us have that, right? I mean, even even the highest level athletes, you still have challenges of time, and so to be able to accomplish both of those things is unbelievable.
How does the 1080 facilitate your contrast training?
So the 1080 has just made things a lot easier. I mean, I would tell you, for years and years in our fall programming for track, we use like a sled. We would do a sled pull for a contrast. We'd run 30 meters with about a 10% load on their body weight for 30 meters. We'd do that twice, and then we would unload and do it, without weight. And we would usually time that rep. Again, I've been timing stuff for a long time. Tony comes along, rank, record, publish. I'm like, man, this guy's a brother from another mother. But that was kind of the contrast. Well, now what we have on the 1080s, we can actually run a load profile on them. We can find the exact amount of load that we want. When you're training 50 high school kids, it's hard to find the exact load. You're guessing, and I'm not sure that 1, 2, 3, 4% is going to make that big of a difference, especially in a, like a young developing athlete. But when you're working with an elite level athlete, those percentages make a difference. And so the 1080 allows us to dial it in to within, a half a pound, and keeps it exactly consistent. I mean, just how smooth the equipment is unreal, compared to, hey coach, the sled broke over here and, homeboy went down on his face or whatever. It's like, now we have this elite piece of equipment that can do the exact same thing we've been doing, just safer, more accurate. I think we're probably going to see better results because of that.
Real quick, Tony, just before you jump in, because I don't want to kill the flow. I love this. But just to the audience, if you guys have questions, please start dropping them in the Q&A, and we'll try to tackle as many of them as possible. But Tony, go ahead. Did you have something else you wanted to add there?
No, I was just my brain was thinking back to two things that I've done, and probably Brian has done too. It's almost laughable now. If you don't have some cringy things in your past, then you haven't evolved much. And I just remember 25 years ago contrasting with running with a parachute followed by a bungee cord. Like, and both things are like laughable now. But those were my high tech things. And in a way, I was thinking, right, like, okay, resistance with the parachute, and now overspeed with the bungee cord. Yeah, it's just we don't do that. Were you a parachute guy ever?
Absolutely. I mean, anything you get your hands on, to add resistance and then, to come back and figure out resistance. I used to drive all over Denver to find the perfect hill that would land at about 3% grade, to do some downhill running. And I'd drive my kids, 20 miles to go find that perfect hill. I feel like guys like you and I should be getting some kind of royalties from 1080 for, what they're doing now. Of all the, dumb stuff that we tried, but I think we were on the right track. We just didn't have access. I didn't have resources. We didn't have the knowledge. The equipment wasn't there. And, a lot of the high level athletes were using parachutes and bungee cords, so it's not like we were, complete head in the sand. We were on the right track,
Yeah, you guys should get some R&D dollars for figuring out exactly the right amount of resistance for 1080. Yeah. So Brian, I was going to ask, is this something that's relatively new to you in terms of you incorporating that? It sounds like it's something that you've been incorporating maybe unintentionally for a long time, but in terms of intentionally trying to incorporate it, is that relatively new for you, or is this something you've been doing for a long time?
The newness is the technology, the technology and equipment. I would say implementing contrast training, and goes way back for me. I was privileged to be able to kind of watch and learn from a coach named Tony Wells, who was probably the best track coach nobody's ever heard of. He was kind of a youth coach here in the Denver area. And when I'd go up and watch his practices, he was a big two loaded reps by one unloaded rep in almost everything he did. And he implemented weight vests and, plyometrics and depth jumps, and his weight room was very similar. And I took that concept and ran with that from a very young age. I didn't come by like my system or how we train athletes more than just watching coaches and then trying to replicate it and asking a lot of questions of why that would, and then you start to see how it changes things. And over time, right, those aren't things that just change, in a session or even a week, but over the course of time, those higher outputs on the daily basis that you're getting from, almost a temporary increase in your muscle's ability to generate force because you're adding a load. Then when you take that load away, you really can roll, and you might hit PR speeds or get into the higher end of output that you may not have gotten to otherwise. And that's what we're always chasing, right? I mean, Tony says it with his stuff, like, any fool can make another fool tired by running. We don't get a lot of accomplishment out of just, repping through, at anything less than almost 100% output when we're in that energy system. So it just creates higher outputs for us, and that's what we've been after for a long time. Yeah, I don't know if it's new. It's just now it's just a lot easier.
You mentioned the PAP, or I just say potentiation.
Yep.
Potentiation is an okay word to use, but I think it's important. I go back to that guy almost 30 years ago that said that when you squat and then jump, the collective effect is greater than the sum of the parts. That there's some magic in the contrast, and that potentiation is where one thing makes another thing better,
Yep.
and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, there's the output, there's the energy systems that I think it enhances. It also, for me, with some of the resisted stuff that we'll do, I like it because it slows the movement down enough to be able to coach the technical model side of it. Right. And I don't know if that's something that gets talked about a lot, but when you're really focused on the technical model of how the the foot interacts with the ground, where their positions are in extension and flexion, then it's hard to see that sometimes at really high speeds. So if a kid's just running full speed, you might have to take it and videotape it and break it down. But if you put a load on them, it slows things down enough that it highlights where they're deficient. And then you can come back and coach that. And so for a long time, I've used a resisted sprint of just being able to help coach the technical model.